This is H.G. Tudor. A little while ago, I asked if people had questions for me to email them to me, and I would answer them. I'm pleased with the response that I have received, and now, in a series of videos, I will be addressing a number of the questions that have been sent to me. The first question is from Xena Girl 10 in the United States of America, who asks, "Good afternoon, HG. How do I get the narcissist to move out of my small town? This town is not big enough for the two of us." Well, Xena Girl, apart from the fact that you are not in a position to rustle up a posse to drive him out of town, the most effective way to get a narcissist to move out of a small town is to expose him. His reaction will be dependent to some extent on the type of narcissist that he is, whether he is lesser, mid-range, or a greater. But generally speaking, the narcissist will, of course, have a number of sources. The primary source for the bulk of his fuel needs, a number of secondary sources, and also tertiary sources. Mid-range and greater narcissists have larger fueled networks. Lessers have the smallest. What tends to happen, however, in a small town where people generally know one another, is that if the narcissist's behaviour is exposed in a way that he is unable to counter through his smear campaign, accordingly, you will need to ensure that your smearing of him gets in first without him having a chance to respond to it and avoiding the fact that he might be tipped off by somebody. If you are able to tell everybody what he is, and they accept that, then there is a very good chance that this wide exposure will mean that he will not only feel significantly wounded, and this will ignite his fury, it will also mean that he becomes rather wary of those around him in terms of being wounded further. The initial wounding that takes place when he realizes that he has been exposed may actually cause him, particularly if he is a lesser narcissist, to lash out at those around him with heated fury. Thus he shouts, breaks things, attacks people. This, of course, works against him, as this demonstrates to those who are observing that what you have said about him is true. A mid-ranger is more likely to try and seek the sympathy and pity of people and get them on side, but if they have been significantly turned against him already, he will find this will not work, and therefore this risk of additional wounding causes him to avoid dealing with these people. A greater narcissist will motivate himself with significant energy and charm in order to counter your exposure. It is also likely that as a consequence of his networks, he will hear at an early stage what you are doing and put in place his own smearing of you to counter it. Accordingly, trying to expose a greater in this way is much more difficult. Essentially, however, if you are dealing with a lesser or mid-range narcissist, you need to look at exposing them. Obtain independent evidence, speak to the people that you can trust, rely on those people to disseminate that information to other people, and as news spreads, eventually the narcissist will learn of this. The exposure will cause them to realize that people have turned against them, they are being exposed, this will wound them, and the cessation of various fuel supplies to them will cause them such a problem that they will be forced to up sticks and seek pastures new, and as a consequence move out of this small town. Patrick from Ontario, Canada asks, "Why does my narcissist keep texting me out of the blue, telling me about her life and that she would like to meet up for drinks and catch up as friends 7 months after the discard? When I attempt to engage in conversation that she originally initiated, she then disappears sometimes for as long as 3 months, and then she appears and then does it all over again." In this instance, Patrick, following the discard, she obviously found a new primary source, assuming that you were her primary source in the first instance. 7 months have elapsed, and she has begun to devalue the current primary source. This means that she is looking for a replacement. When we do this, we will look at new people and make them our intimate partner secondary sources with a view to potentially promoting them, but we will also return to previous primary sources. The reason we return to these previous primary sources is that we have invested in them before, we know about them, and it appeals to our sense of power that we can look to draw them back into our world. Accordingly, what she is doing is that she is engaging in benign hoovers. These are benign follow-up hoovers, and she gains fuel from your response. It also tells her that you are susceptible to her approach, and because you reply to her, she knows that she has a degree of control over you. It is likely at the same time she is engaging with other appliances with a view to make them the primary source, and she is just checking that she can rely on you for fuel and potentially draw you back into her world. You are, through your responses, telling her that you remain susceptible, and as a consequence of this, she is satisfied that you remain on side, and therefore she retreats from you as she focuses her energies on pulling in other people as well. She then wants to check a little while later that you remain susceptible, so she contacts you. She gains some positive fuel from you from your response, and she also gains the assurance that you remain susceptible to her contact, that you are not ignoring her, and therefore, in effect, she can count on you for fuel, and, if she so chooses, to look to draw you back into the formal relationship with her. What she is doing at this time is drawing fuel from a number of sources, many of which she would be considering to promote the primary source. This includes you and new people that she will have seduced. She is ensuring that she has you in place, that you are reliable and that you can be counted on. Thus, when you confirm this to her by your willingness to respond, she knows that she does not need to expend any further energy in contacting you until a few more months down the line. The simple way to deal with this is that when she does text you, it's for you to ignore it. She gains no fuel, she may try harder to contact you, keep ignoring her, and then eventually she will realize that she is not gaining any fuel from you, that you are now an unreliable prospect of fuel and unlikely to respond to her overtures, and you will focus her efforts elsewhere. The next question comes from SK in Canada. Hello HG, thank you for continuing to make your excellent recordings, for working on your blog and for writing your beautiful books for our education and aesthetic pleasure. You're very welcome, SK. His question is, besides possible material consequences if you do not comply, what personal benefits have you found in your honest introspection and perhaps even reaching out for help from professionals? SK is referring to my ongoing treatment and engagement with the 2 individuals who I refer to as the good doctors. In terms of the personal benefits, I have found that I have gained a greater awareness of what I am, why I do as I do, and chiefly the causes of that, relating to events from my childhood. I have also found the process interesting in terms of sparring with the good doctors, trying to ascertain their motives. It has also enabled me to understand my victims in a more effective way. It has, of course, enabled me to hone my skills and increase my craft in terms of what I do. It has enabled me to understand more of the impact of what I do on people, although it has not altered my view in terms of the necessity of what I have to do, nor has it caused me to care about the consequences of what I do. At this juncture, and of course it is a long and ongoing process, as has been explained to me, it would be fairest to say that it has increased my awareness. It has allowed me significant greater understanding of myself, and from what they have explained to me, These are the foundations of moving to the next stage, which is of looking to alter my behaviours so that they are applied in a more socially acceptable manner, slow down the instinctive reactions that I engage in, and then to look at the deconstruction of myself and reconstruction in an alternative way. I understand, however, that all of this process will take a particularly long time. Paul from the UK asks, what's the difference between a lesser and a victim? In terms of categorization, having observed many of my kind within my family, my social network, and in the world at large, as well as understanding myself, I have categorized my kind as coming within 3 schools: the lesser, the mid-range, and the greater. There are also subdivisions within each school. So, for example, one has a lower lesser, a mid-lesser, and an upper lesser. I will be writing books detailing each of these schools of narcissism. However, essentially, the lesser victim has a lower cognitive function, has a low control threshold, rarely uses charm, tends to have a greater reliance on physical violence. The mid-range narcissist, which some people might describe as a covert narcissist, behaves in a much more passive-aggressive way. Greater use of silent treatments, cold shouldering, has some degree of charm, has a greater cognitive function than the lesser, acts mainly through instinct, but there is some degree of calculation. Both the lesser and the mid-range have no awareness of what they are, nor can they recognize their own kind. The greater is extremely calculating, has awareness of what he or she is in terms of behaviors, even if they do not know the exact label for their behavior. Cold, calculating, extremely charming, often very successful, and with a greater cognitive function. There are considerably much more detail that I could provide with regard to the differences between these 3 schools of narcissism, which would take a considerable amount of time to describe. But in essence, those are the main things, and there are some videos which provide more detail in that regard. I also talk of the cadres of narcissists. Somatic, which are those which are interested in materialistic things, looks, going to expensive restaurants, driving a nice car. Cerebral, who place greater emphasis on the mind, intellect, social charm. The elite, which is a combination of somatic and cerebral, and the victim narcissist. The victim narcissist is somebody who looks to be mothered, wants to be looked after. All narcissists have some victim traits, but the victim narcissist is in a class of his own with regard to wanting somebody to look after him. He often has mental health issues aside from the disorder of narcissistic personality disorder. He also may have physical problems as well. Some are real and some are imagined. Both the cadre and the school are applicable to the type of narcissist. So, for example, one may have a lesser victim narcissist, or a mid-range somatic, or a greater elite. So one combines them. Some of the combinations are mutually exclusive. So, for example, you will not see a greater victim narcissist. But essentially, those are the categories that I apply for the purposes of enabling people to understand the different types of our kind. And there are significant differences between the two, and as I mentioned, those will be detailed more extensively in additional works which are in progress. Terry asks the question, when you discard somebody, do you know you will likely hoover them again, or in your mind are you done? This again depends on the type of narcissist. A lesser and a mid-range narcissist, when somebody is discarded, regards them as effectively deleted. They are a malfunctioning appliance, and therefore the narcissist has no need to deal with them ever again. Of course, when that individual is discarded, The narcissist has a new primary source, who they are infatuated with and who is the focus of all of the attention of the narcissist. Accordingly, the lesser and the mid-range have no interest in hoovering the discarded individual, and for all the narcissist cares, the person that has been discarded may as well not exist. The greater narcissist adopts a similar approach that recognizes that there may be the possibility of hoovering in the future, but this is not something that is at the forefront of the greater's mind. With all of our kind, we are infatuated with the new person that we've installed as the primary source. We regard them as the one, the person that is going to provide us with the delicious positive fuel that will sustain us, and that this person will not let us down. Accordingly, we engage in the embedding of them as our primary source and the continuance of the golden period. The hoover, of course, only occurs with regard to the discarded individual if the following happens. First of all, if the discarded person tries to contact us when we are engaged in a golden period with our new primary source. Initially, they may be rebuffed politely, but because we regard the discarded person as a malfunctioning appliance and therefore treacherous and a traitor to us, they have been painted black. Therefore, if they keep appearing, they are essentially making a nuisance of themselves during the golden period with our new appliance. Therefore, the old discarded appliance will be subjected to malign hoovers. We want them to go away. We are wary that they may well spoil the new golden period that we are engaging in our new primary source. Consequently, we want the old, discarded appliance to stay away. They are a troublemaker. They are the crazy one. That is why they are smeared. And if they keep trying to contact us, they will be subjected to malign hoovers. We want them to stay away. Later, when the new primary source is being devalued and we are looking to find their replacement, we of course consider the old, discarded appliances. That is when there will be benign follow-up hoovers, either to draw fuel or to draw fuel and cause that person to enter into the formal relationship with us and being reinstated as our primary source. Tina from East London asks, on your journey from discovering you are a narcissist to taking on help from those good doctors, did your lack of acceptance of accountability for the pain that you have caused to your victims change at all? The simple answer to that question, Tina, is no. The people that are my victims let me down. They failed to provide me with what I am entitled to. They failed to give me what I wanted. And as a consequence, because of my natural state of wariness and paranoia, which is caused as a consequence of this world being a hateful and unjust place, I regarded their failure as treachery on their part, for which they were justifiably punished. The behaviour that was meted out to them was both necessary in terms of drawing negative fuel from them in order to service my requirements, and also punishment for what they failed to deliver. Similarly, the fact of their discard was also punishment, and as a consequence, I regard what was done to them as just and equitable for their treachery, and this also corresponds with my sense of entitlement and my lack of acceptance of any accountability for what I have done. I understand that from what I have been told in my work with the good doctors, that of course from your perspective, you regard such an approach as unacceptable and wrong. Of course, you must understand, I look at it from a completely different perspective. My needs are my needs. They come first above everything else. I am not equipped to feel remorse. I am not equipped to feel guilt. Such things hinder me. Therefore, as a consequence, I have no concept of being accountable for all my actions, and even though I have engaged in the treatment with the good doctors, it has not altered my stance with regard to feeling any guilt, accountability, or remorse for what I have done. Those actions were required. I took them, and those that failed me, the outcome that they suffered was justifiable. Mary from Los Angeles asks, I want to understand this concept of taking traits from others. I can't seem to get my head around it. In essence, Mary, we create a construct. The purpose of this construct is twofold. It imprisons what I refer to as the creature. What I understand is my real self. And this wretched individual is not allowed to surface. It represents a period of time of helplessness and weakness, and must be kept hidden and locked away, deep within the construct. In order to ensure that the creature does not escape, the construct must be created in a way that is so it is sealed tight. One way of doing this is to furnish the construct with various traits that I want the world to see. I do recognise, and this has been underlined to me from the good doctors, that I do have my own traits in terms of I am an intelligent man, I have been successful in sport, I'm successful in my career, I do have charm, etc. But I do not regard that as enough as a consequence of what has happened to me when I was younger. Therefore, I feel a need to embellish and to exaggerate. With some of our kind, they may not have the inherent traits that I have, and therefore their need to add from others is even greater. By adding these traits from other people, it serves two functions. First of all, it creates a construct which keeps the creature imprisoned, but it also then creates an image to the rest of the world that is far more attractive, which means that people are drawn to us and they will provide us with more fuel. Accordingly, we take traits from other people. This means, for example, if I was to meet somebody at a dinner and that person explained to me that they had been successful in terms of writing a particular book about a particular subject, I would assimilate that information and then talking to somebody else, perhaps at the same dinner later on, talk to them about the book that I had written about a particular subject. I essentially take that trait from the other guest, make it my own, and then pass it off with somebody else. When I take that trait, that adds to the construct. Therefore, the false self that has been created becomes better. Thus, the real self is kept hidden and locked away. And by the same token of being able to talk about this excellent book that I have written, the new person that I talk to later about it admires what I have to say and thus gives me fuel. Accordingly, I might utilise the fact that one of my friends holds the record for the 100 metres, and I pass that off as my own. It might be that I utilise somebody else's success in business and pass it off as my own. Thus, from very small details to even large and wild boasts, we will take traits from the people all around us in different degrees and pass them off as our own with other people. And these traits keep changing. We meet different people, we pass them off to other people. And therefore, that is one of the things that we look for when we are targeting our victims. Primarily it's fuel, but we also want residual benefits from them. For example, dependent on the type of narcissist, will this person look after us? Do they have money? Do they live in a large house that we might move into? Do they have a car that we can use? Do they have a network of friends that we might tap into? Perhaps they might be useful to us in terms of promotion at work. And then we also look for the character traits. And these character traits are taken from people. So if you imagine it as stripping away a shard, a segment or a fragment from somebody else, and then placing it onto a frame that we've created until there are lots and lots and lots of these shards and segments that creates the construct. If you look at my book, Splintered Malice, which is a paperback on Amazon, the front cover of that gives you an idea of how the construct looks. M3 asks the question, when discovering my husband's infidelity, he discarded me by saying he had never loved me. Then he asked me for the divorce, and immediately after he suggested to be remarried again. though essentially he seemed to hoover very soon after the discard. Why was that? The sequence of events is as such. You discovered your husband's infidelity, and as a consequence, the manner in which you reacted caused him to decide to discard you. It may well be that your exposure of his behaviour and to other people caused him to regard you as unreliable. You may well then have also stopped providing him with the fuel that he wanted. More likely than not, however, I suspect that your discovery of your husband's infidelity actually coincided with him deciding that the new primary source that he was courting, namely the person that he was being unfaithful with, had reached a point where he could embed her. And that meant it was time to discard you. So I suspect that your discovery was entirely coincidental, and he had decided that because the new prospect was sufficient for his fuel needs, etc., it was time to discard you. He obviously then asked for the divorce, presumably because he wants to marry the new primary source and also to cause you further pain. However, his suggestion that he wanted to remarry you again is for one of two reasons. The first, and the more likely one, is that he decided that he wanted to cause you further torment by getting your hopes up again and to draw further fuel from you. Alternatively, the reason why he did this was that the new primary source that he thought was embedded was either not embedded and for some reason left him, or he discovered that the new primary source was not as effective in terms of the provision of fuel, residual benefits and character traits as he thought, and he had made a mistake, and therefore he regarded the new person as somebody that was not going to be as reliable. Consequently, this created a fuel crisis for him, causing him to turn back to you to try and hoover you back into the formal relationship. So it seems to me that what is likely to have happened is that he has made an error, lost in some way through choice or escape the new prospective primary source, and therefore, as a matter of urgency, he has had to return to you. This concludes part 1 of Ask HG Tudor. Further parts will follow.